It only took me, by half a year, but I'm finally back to talking about Mega Man. And since I finished up the classic series last time, where else is there to go besides Mega Man X? So let's see how the Mega Man franchise transitioned to the 4th generation. Did it transition well? Is the game good? Should the game still be considered one of the best 2D platformers ever? Let's find out. Now, while this is the 15th video of my Mega Man retrospective, you don't need to watch any of the previous videos to watch this one. Of course, I'd love for you to go back and watch all 14 previous videos, but as long as you have a basic understanding or passing knowledge of classic Mega Man, you should be good. Before we start with the actual game, I think it's important to start with what was going on with the video games prior to the release of the game. To keep a long story short, Nintendo released the NES in 1985, and it was a groundbreaking success, bringing video games back to the heights they reached back when something like the first Atari was released. The NES had a ton of great games on it, like Mario and Zelda, but there was also Capcom's Mega Man. It never reached the heights of something like Mario, but people played Mega Man, mainly 2 and 3. If you showed your random Joe Schmo a picture of Mega Man or X, they'd probably recognize him. By the 90s, Sega had released the Mega Drive, their 16-bit console dwarfing the NES in sound quality and graphical capability. Nintendo released their own 16-bit console, the Super NES, or the SNES. While Nintendo's franchises like Mario moved on to the SNES, Mega Man kinda didn't. They made 6 games on the NES. Rockman 6 came out in November 1993, while the Super Famicom came out in November 1990. I say all this to show, when Capcom did finally make the 16-bit leap, they did it with flying colors. Mega Man X is basically just another Mega Man with 16-bit hardware, and that is what makes it so cutting edge compared to the other games before it. When you hit the start button, you don't go to a stage select like previous Mega Man games, you'll instead get hit with an intro stage. Pretty much everyone has already covered this stage and why it's so good, but I don't care, I'm gonna do it too. The stage shows how to control X, move around, jump, and shoot. The enemies are lined up so that you have to line your shots up with them, showing the basic gameplay of Mega Man. Then you have a segment where the B-Blader shows up, and the only way to get past is to destroy it. But it's so heavy that the bridge also collapses. The only way to get out is to use X's ability to kick up walls, something new for the series. You also have the Crusher showing up to display that the stage can be damaged and might also be a threat to you. Later on, you see that parts of the stage can collapse, clearly showing you, if you didn't see earlier, that the stage can be a real threat, and you have to react accordingly. And quickly, might I add. At the end of the stage, you fight some dude in a purple Boba Fett cosplay, and you can't really do anything to him while he's demolishing you. He captures you, and there's nothing you can do until... This is probably one of the most famous character introductions in a video game, and this is the moment where we finally get some context. The guy in red is Zero, and he tells Mega Man X that he'll keep on looking for Sigma's hideout, and the guy who just kicked X's butt is Vile. Sigma is the game's main villain, and he's leading a rebellion against humanity. But while Zero looks for Sigma, X should take out Sigma's forces. Zero believes that X can become more powerful than he is now, perhaps even more powerful than him or Sigma. To establish the game's story, we have to go back to the game's intro cutscene, even before the title screen. We start with the diagnostic on X's systems, and then see that X is the first robot capable of full free will. To ensure the project went smoothly, X was sealed away for 30 years while his systems underwent tests to make sure he wouldn't turn evil or anything. Unfortunately, X's creator doesn't have that long to live, and at the end we learn that X's creator is Thomas Light, the creator of the original Mega Man. I think it's interesting how the first real death in the series is Light. You think we'd see Wily die first, and technically he did die in Mega Man 3, but he came back practically 5 seconds later. Yeah, we can assume that everyone else is dead by this point, and they are, but Light is the first one we're hearing of. 100 years later, X is found by Dr. Kane, who was amazed by X and used him as a blueprint for robots known as Reploids. Some of these Reploids went berserk and began to commit crimes, and they were labeled Mavericks, and the Maverick Hunters were made to combat these Reploids. X joins as a B-class hunter, and X's best friend, Zero, joins as a higher S-class hunter. Sigma was originally the leader of the Maverick Hunters, but he began his own Maverick Rebellion, believing that since Reploids were stronger and more capable, they should be in charge, and he took 8 of the top hunters with him. Now, it's up to X and Zero to take the fight to Sigma and take down his rebellion. With all this exposition, it's clear that the X series had a much bigger focus on story than any Mega Man preceding it, as well as the classic games released after it. Mega Man had to be reinvented for the new generation and new console, and you can see this reinvention everywhere. The story, the setting, but also the game design and art design. In the first 6 Mega Man games, you can see the artists get better at making art and sprites for the console. Some of this is probably due to just how many games were made for the system, but that doesn't change the fact that the difference between Mega Man 1 and Mega Man 6 is night and day. X1, being on a more powerful console, blows the art of the previous games out of the water with just how much detail the sprites and animation can have. It wasn't just the in-game sprites that got more detailed, but the character designs also got more detailed as the series went on. Compare the Robot Masters in Mega Man 1 to Mega Man 6, and again, night and day difference. However, even by Mega Man 6, the bosses were handicapped by the limitations of the NES, like how many colors could be displayed at once. X, meanwhile, isn't limited by this, as it has a load of colors and segments in his design that Rock doesn't, and this is translating to this in-game sprite very well. Something pretty cool is that, when you get to the stage select, you have the 8 bosses you'd expect, but not only do you get a preview of their stage, you can also see where these stages take place and how they connect to each other physically. You can see that Storm Eagle's stage is right next to Spark Mandrill's stage, so it makes a lot of sense how defeating Storm Eagle causes his plane to crash into Spark Mandrill's power plant, thus killing most of the power. But if you play Spark Mandrill's stage first, you'll see how the electricity functions just fine, as you have balls of electricity to dodge. Or how defeating Launch Octopus causes Sting Chameleon stage to flood since the two are right next to each other. This is the strategy for the Heart Tank at Sting Chameleon stage. However, you can also see a brief bio on all the bosses, as you see their name, height, weight, as well as some of their attacks. This is all pretty minor stuff that you probably wouldn't notice in your first few playthroughs, but I think it's pretty cool that the devs decided to add this stuff regardless of how many people would see it. In the classic Mega Man series, the Robot Masters were based around a singular theme, and then the word man was just added to the end of their name. So we get bosses like Metal Man, Snake Man, Cut Man, you get the idea. For the X series, the devs settled on something new, an element plus an animal. So in this game, we get Mavericks like Chill Penguin, Storm Eagle, Flame Mammoth, and so on. A fun thing to notice is that each of these Mavericks has the Maverick symbol on them, which is just a really stylized version of the Greek letter Sigma. Each of the bosses also has a personality to them, but it's never displayed in the game itself. You get their personalities in later games like X5 and the Day of Sigma, as well as auxiliary materials like the Mega Man X Complete Worksbook. But once you pick a stage, it's time to get to the gameplay. At the start, X plays pretty much the same as Rock in Mega Man 6. You walk forward to shoot down your enemies with your Buster, and you can charge up your Buster for bigger and more powerful shots. However, X's moveset expands upon Rock's a good deal. Of course, there's the wall jump I talked about earlier. X can slide down walls, jump up them, off them, and between them. One of the major reasons this is so great is that falling down a bottomless pit isn't as much of a death sentence anymore. If you can cling to the wall and mash the jump button fast enough, you can save yourself. By default, this is X's moveset. Yeah, it's pretty short and isn't much, but not only is this fun enough to play an entire game with, there's more to X's moveset. The RPG genre was growing in popularity during X1's development, and a core part of RPGs is player growth. You start the game with very little, and end the game with the strength to kill God. The devs decided to incorporate this feeling of player growth into the game, and so there are 10 new items for the player to collect, building on the items you found in Mega Man 5. First, there are the armor capsules. You can find them in any order, but the one in Chill Penguin stage is the one you're most likely to find first. You'll find it in the middle of the stage, and an AI version of Dr. Light will show up, telling X that there are 4 capsules in the stages and that each will upgrade X. The capsule in Chill Penguin stage will grant you the foot parts, which give X the ability to dash, which quickly became a staple across the entire franchise. With the dash, you can traverse the stages more quickly, and you can jump higher, on the ground and off walls. The head parts kinda suck, as they just allow you to break these blocks with your head. Sounds cool until you realize that these blocks hardly appear in the game. Off the top of my head, they exist to block off the arm parts, 1 sub-tank, and 1 heart tank. Although I don't really blame the devs, since the head parts in this franchise are either useless or near useless, like X1 and X3, overpowered, like an X4, or so useless you don't even know what they do, like an X5. The arm parts allow X to charge his buster shots up to a 3rd level, increasing the damage and massively increasing the hitbox. X can also charge up his special weapons, and each gets a unique effect. The body parts decrease damage taken by 50%, which easily makes it pretty good. On top of these armor parts, there are also 8 heart tanks scattered across the stages. When starting the game, you'll notice that X's health bar is a lot smaller than Rock's. That's because the heart tanks will increase X's health bar, and when you grab all 8, X's health bar is bigger than Rock's. In addition to increasing your health, there are also the sub-tanks. These are kinda like E-tanks, where you can refill your health on the fly. However, when you collect them they start out empty, so you need to fill them up by picking up health capsules while already being at full health. I think my only issue with the sub-tanks is that using one will drain the entire tank, regardless of how much you actually need. And I don't think this gets fixed until X8 and Zero games. Finding these collectibles is always pretty fun, as you need to think outside the box and use your moves in a cool way. For the heart tank and sub-tank and Spark Mandrill stage, you need to use the boomerang cutters so they can pick up items and bring them back to you.
Hey, editing is MShea here. You actually don't need Boomerang Cutter to get the Heart Tank and Spark Mandrill stage. It's entirely possible to get it just with the dash jump. Using Boomerang Cutter, though, is probably the faster and easier way to do it, but it is possible without it.
You need to use the head and foot parts to break some blocks so you can get the arm parts and sub-tank and Flying Mammoth stage. And you need to beat Launch Octopus' stage before going to Sting Chameleon so you can get that stage's heart tank. There's probably some way to get the heart tank without the water, but the water is the easiest way. Beyond the collectibles, the game's special weapons are also pretty darn good. Maybe not on the level of something like 9 special weapons, but still good. When Shotgun Knights misses the target and hits a wall, it ricochets into 3 smaller shots. This is especially useful during the tower climb in Boomer Koanger stage, since you get around the shields that the Hoganimers have. Homing Torpedo tracks onto enemies you're too lazy to aim at. Chameleon Sting shoots in 3 directions so you're more likely to hit a target. Boomerang Cutter picks up items and brings them back to you. And then Storm Tornado and Fire Wave just obliterate all in their path. And as I said earlier, the arm parts allow you to charge up your special weapons, and they do something unique. Storm Tornado and Fire Wave become even more effective than before. Electric Spark sends a massive wave of electricity ahead and behind you, and Chameleon Sting turns you invincible. It's a great set of special weapons, and has uses when attacking enemies and just hunting for items. With these collectibles, upgrades, and stage changes, I'm sure you can see just how replayable this game is. When I play this game, and all Mega Man games, I like to get all the upgrades in a single run, so I usually play in a way where I don't have to revisit any stages, although I don't think that's possible in this game. However, you don't need to play like that. On my first playthrough, I played the way I normally do, but on a second playthrough I decided to play the game in weakness order instead, and it was a pretty different experience since I had different upgrades and stages than I normally do. When I get to Spark Mandrill stage, I usually have most of the armor parts and a few heart tanks and at least 1 sub-tank. This time, just the foot parts and Shotgun Ice. The bosses in this game are also pretty good for the most part. Some Mega Man bosses fall into the trap where if you fight the boss with their weakness, the boss becomes an absolute cakewalk, but I wouldn't say that applies here. Spark Mandrill is naturally one exception, as is where the name Spark Mandrill Syndrome comes from. Hit him with Shotgun Ice and the fight is over. Sting Chameleon and Boomer Koanger are 2 more examples I can think of. However, I don't think other bosses fall victim to this. With someone like Armored Armadillo, using Electric Spark just gets rid of the annoying part of his fight, but it's still an actual fight. With Launch Octopus, he's still the hardest boss, but now you're doing a little bit more damage. And then with pretty much all the bosses, fighting them without their weakness offers a real challenge. Yeah, it really isn't good that some of these bosses have Spark Mandrill Syndrome, but some don't, and I don't fight half of these bosses with their weaknesses in my preferred stage order anyway. So yeah, it's kinda bad, but it doesn't really bother me. However, as I just said with the bosses, this game isn't perfect, and one issue I have is the performance. 95% of the time, the game runs smoothly. But there are a few moments where the action gets intense and the game chugs for a bit. Mainly the minecart segment at the end of Armored Armadillo stage, and when you break the glass for the sub-tank in Storm Eagle stage. Interestingly enough, this is something that the 6th Gen X collection fixed, and I wish they could have done something similar for the X Legacy collection. But oh well. Before I forget, I should mention how I played this game. Of course, I do own the X Legacy collection, but I didn't play the game on it, and for one reason. Integer scaling. I brought this up in my Mega Man 9 video, but the reception was pretty weird. Some people said that it was just a nitpick and shouldn't be the reason I hate that game, when I don't think that's ever what I said. It was just a small nitpick I had with the Legacy Collection 2, and 9 was just the first game I could really bring it up. And to be clear, the same feeling applies here. Integer scaling is an issue with the X Legacy Collection and not X1 itself. Basically, the games were upscaled from their original 240p, but they did it in a weird way so now the pixels are uneven. You can tell in the health bar and whenever the screen scrolls, since pixels are changing size right before your eyes.
Hey, Editing Zemshia here. One more thing that makes the X Legacy Collection versions worse is the input lag. I didn't mention this in the classic videos because I don't think the first 2 Legacy Collections have input lag, but for the XLC it's pretty well known. It's interesting because I used to be a defender of the input lag a few years ago, saying it was so tiny that it was negligible. But now that I've played the game in an emulator a few times and then come back to the XLC, yeah, no, the input lag is an issue. It's not so bad that I can pinpoint, yeah, we got 200 milliseconds of lag, but it is enough that I notice it.
To solve this, I basically just played on an emulator. Problem solved. And credit to Capcom, they did fix this issue. The Zero games, the Battle Network games, and the Star Force games don't have this issue since there's an option for perfect scaling, so all the pixels are equal sizes. To talk about the soundtrack, it's pretty freaking good. The NES was home to some great tunes, but the SNES is where music took a big leap in quality, and it's great. With the added power, you can actually hear what specific instruments these chiptunes are trying to replicate, and when you combine this with the great composition, you end up with a pretty great soundtrack. Some people say this is the best OST in the series, and I've even heard someone say it was the best Mega Man OST. And while I do agree this OST is great, it's not that good, man. X4 through X8 especially outclass it. But regardless, here are some of my favorite songs. With all this said, it's time for the endgame. Naturally, it's time to go to the castle stages, but there's one last thing first. If you go to Armored Armadillo stage with all armor parts, heart tanks, sub-tanks, and you have full health and full sub-tanks and die 5 times at this pit, you get the Hadouken from Street Fighter. Gotta say, as a Capcom fan, it's pretty fun seeing these nods and references to other Capcom games. Basically, you throw out a Hadouken like normal, except it automatically kills its target. The catch is that you have to be at full health to use it, or you'll just do a standard shot. Personally, the timing is a little finicky, so sometimes I would just do a regular shot anyway. But anyway, the 8 Mavericks are defeated, X has grown considerably, and it's time to go to Sigma's fortress. Sigma Palace 1, and all the Sigma Palace levels for this matter, are great, because the designers know that you'll have some of the extra moves, so they can design the stages around that, like how the opening platform segment is made with the foot parts in mind. After the platforming, Vile and Zero return, and Zero is captured while you fight Vile. You still can't damage him, but Zero breaks free and self-destructs to break Vile's right armor. This is pretty cool and satisfying, as Zero was the one who saved us at the beginning, but now he sacrificed himself, and the fight is left up to us. Personally, although the game is light on story, I think it tells you all that's needed. The backstory isn't explained too well, but for a 1993 SNES platformer, coming off a series that already had minimal story, it did its job well enough. You know all that's needed. You don't like Vile, Zero is an ally, Zero says he'll find Sigma and meet with us later, Sigma obviously being the villain, and then what we just saw was some pretty good storytelling within the gameplay. I do prefer how later X games like X5, X6, X7, and X8 explain their plots better while also giving us some interesting banter, at least in the retranslation mods for X5/X6 and Vanilla X8, but this game does the bare minimum, and I'm fine with it. If you make it to this part of the game without the buster parts, Zero will just give you his. To my knowledge, there's no gameplay difference between the two busters. I've heard that it's weird that Zero, a robot made by Wily, has the exact same buster that Light made, but I just chalked this up to a gameplay thing. Zero never gave X his buster, it's just that the devs make sure you have it. But now you have all the tools needed to get through to the other Sigma Palace stages, as there are some sections made easier with charged special weapons. Specifically, there's this climb in Sigma Palace 1 that's made a good bit easier with the invincibility that Chameleon Sting gives you. However, in the council stages, there is one special thing to note. Every Mega Man game has a segment where you have to refight all the bosses again in a row right before the final boss fight. And if you've seen my previous Mega Man videos, hell even my DMC3 one, you know that this is a pattern I do not like. It's just reusing content right before the final boss to pad out the game's runtime. However, this game does it in a different way. The refights are spread across the council stages instead of just doing all 8 in one gauntlet. It is for this reason that I actually don't mind the boss rush in this game. It's a nice little break, and doing each one reminds me that I'm that much closer to Sigma. Well, that, and the fact that you can one-shot each boss with the Hadouken, but that's a smaller reason as to why I like these refights. Sigma Palace 4 is the final fight with Sigma, and right off the bat, I really like how they don't waste any time. One climb up a shaft, and you're at the fight. There are these tiny respawning enemies that you can kill to refill your health and weapon ammo, but otherwise it's straight shot to the boss. The fight against Velgarder in Sigma's first phase is dealt with easily by their weaknesses, and then Sigma has his second phase, where his head merges with the wall and he has big hands. This is easily the hardest boss in the game, as he deals a lot of damage, his attacks cover a wide area, and he doesn't take much damage. His attacks are pretty readable, so as long as you're paying attention and dodging, you'll beat him in a few tries. Once you beat Sigma, the game ends with X looking out into the ocean and thinking about how many lives were lost to get to this point, that he hopes the fighting will end one day. But if Mavericks return, X will be there to stop them. Personally, I've always enjoyed this ending. You just beat the game and our hero takes a moment to recognize all that's led to this, and it shows that while X is a pacifist by nature, he will always fight if he has to. And the fact that X doesn't like the fighting, but does it anyway because it's right, is something I've always loved about him, and makes him more interested in rock. And it's cool to see this only in the first game of the series. But that ends Mega Man X. As you can tell from this video, Mega Man X is a pretty rock-solid game. The game did a lot to set itself apart from its predecessors. It has a great soundtrack, great graphics, fantastic levels and collectibles, and it created a great foundation for many other games in the series. It makes sense why so many call it one of the best Mega Man games, or one of the best 2D platformers period. Personally, yeah, it's great. I think the only issue is that its sequels outperform it in a way that makes the original game boring, namely X4 and X8, heck even Mega Man 11. But still, that doesn't detract from this game being what it is. Fantastic game.